Mini Minerva, providing enrichment and inquiry in a rapidly changing world.
Niall Moorjani identifies as a Scottish, English and Indian writer, storyteller and historical researcher. Niall writes and tells his own stories to perform for other people. He is also a historical researcher, which means he reads and explores areas of history to write about and discuss with other people. Niall also helps children discover their own stories as a teacher in India and has also been asked to talk about history and stories by museums and for charity. Niall uses the power of stories to help people connect to their roots. He has always found a sense of excitement and wonder in the stories from his family's past. Today's Mini Minerva lecture will take the form of a story. Niall will tell us a story that he has written about his own family, and specifically a story about his grandpa. His grandpa was born in India and was incredibly brave as he journeyed over to England as a young man. On his journey, he met lots of different struggles. Much of his story talks about belonging and the different things that belonging can mean. While you are watching and listening to Niall tell his story, we want you to think about your family and your heritage. What is special about your family background, and what makes you most proud to be part of that community? You may also think about why it is so important that everybody feels like they belong and can be proud of who they are. Niall has said this about the story he is going to be telling you today. I hope this story will help British children connect with their own heritage and encourage them to ask questions of their grown-ups, who are sometimes slow to share but have so very much to tell us.
Hello, my name's Niall, and I am a storyteller and a writer. And I've been asked to talk to you today all about heritage. Heritage is something that is made up of lots of other things. In a way, it's where we're from. But that can be complicated. Like, I am from Scotland, but I'm also a bit Indian and a bit English. And it's also not just where we're from, it's where our parents are from. It's where their parents are from, so your grandparents, and even where your grandparents' parents are from. But it's not just that. It's the songs that we sing. It's the food that we eat. It's the clothes that we wear on special occasions. It's the dances we dance. It is all of those things and so many more. But because I'm a storyteller, I often think of heritage as being the stories that we tell, that were told to us by our grandparents and their parents. Actually, grandparents sometimes have the coolest stories. You know how some great stories are made up? Well, some other great stories are completely true. And my grandpa had an amazing tale he used to tell me. It all happened to him when he was just 11 years old. Just a boy. He found himself in the middle of one of the biggest events in world history. It started a long time ago in a beautiful place called Sindh. Now back then, Sindh was part of a country called India, which is far away from us here in Britain. And in Sindh, he had a happy life. He played games with his friends. He went to school, and he had long, fun days in the sun with his brothers and sisters. But things don't always stay happy forever. And because of lots of complicated things going on in the world of grown-ups, his home became unsafe. People were getting very angry at each other. So angry that his mum, who was very clever, realised that they were going to have to leave because it just wasn't safe for them. And so, along with millions of other people, my grandpa went with his mum, his sister and his brother to leave his home that he'd always known and move thousands of kilometres away to the capital in Delhi, where his eldest brothers were already living. This journey he had to take was not easy. It happened in the middle of summer in India. I don't know if you've been to India, but think of the hottest day you've ever experienced in Britain, and it's probably that hot all the time. And things weren't always safe. One day, he told me that they had got on a train to take them from the north where they were further south. And while they were waiting on the train, a group of angry men attacked him and said very scary things. So his mother told him and his brother to run while she put his sister on her shoulders. And so my grandpa did. He ran as fast as he could. And when he stopped running, he couldn't see the train station anymore. And he'd lost his brother. He had no idea where his family were. And that night he found himself all by himself, in the cold, shivering, not sure where to go. Have you ever been lost in the supermarket? Just for a few minutes. It's really scary, isn't it? I still get lost in the supermarket and get scared. Can you imagine what it would be like to be lost in a place you don't know at night in the dark, not even sure what had happened to your mum? My poor grandpa said it was the scariest thing that ever happened to him. A strange man tried to take him what he thought was the wrong way. And when Grandpa knew that the man couldn't be trusted, the man got scary and angry, and so Grandpa had to run away from him. And when he did, he was even more lost than ever. But somehow, that morning, he found his mum by chance. And they had a great big hug. And eventually they made it to the capital of India, in Delhi. For some of the journey they took more trains, but for some of it they walked in the hot sun with thousands of other people. And they stayed in camps. When they did get to Delhi, they were safer than they had been. But things still weren't easy for them. You see, they didn't actually speak the language. India is such a huge country that there are 22 languages spoken there, and many more versions of those languages too. So he had to learn Hindi, and it was very hard. And people weren't always nice because his family weren't from there. But eventually, he grew up, and because he had listened to his mother and studied hard at school, he got a job as an engineer. And this meant that he could travel the railways with the Indian railway network. And he went all over India, seeing the most amazing sights, palaces, sunsets, great lakes, the sea. He saw it all. One day, he even saw the Queen of Britain, who was visiting, and he took a photo, which I still have. But eventually, he decided he was grown up enough to start a family. And he met my dadima, which is Hindi for granny. And they got married, and when they did, my grandpa thought that the best thing he could do for his children was make sure they got the best opportunities in life. And India was still a hard country to raise a child in. So he thought that he would go to Britain, where we're from, where we are today. Because Britain was asking for people to come and help work in the country. So Grandpa did. Now back in these days, flying was so expensive, so he had to get a boat instead. He took a boat across the seas, and it took him 3 weeks to get from India to Britain. He was only allowed to come to Britain with just £3 in his pocket. £3! I could not survive for very long on just £3, but that's all he had. He was helped by some people already living there to get a house and to get a job. He peeled potatoes in a hotel restaurant. He wanted to get a job as an engineer, but in Britain nobody would recognise his Indian qualifications and work experience. So instead, after every day of work, he went to night school, and even as a grown-up, he kept studying. He had an old expression which was earning and learning. You should always earn and learn throughout your life. And so he did. And eventually he learned good enough English to pass the exams, and he got a job as an engineer. But it didn't last for very long. You see, in those days, people could be horrible to you just because of the colour of your skin. I know sometimes they are today, but it was a lot more common back then. And a new man took over the place he was working and told him that he was fired because he didn't like his brown skin. It was a hard time to have brown or black skin, or any skin that wasn't white. People used to throw eggs at him in the streets, hurl insults. If my grandpa and daddima were looking for a new flat, they would often have the door slammed in their faces as soon as it was opened, or they would be told to go home in a very rude way. My grandpa always decided to rise above it, and he thought that for as many bad people as there were kind ones too. And there were kind people, even then. And eventually he got a job for British Telecom, BT. And he worked there as an engineer for years and years. He was even part of the team that designed a plug socket that you can probably still find in your house today. If you ask your parents or your grown-ups to show you which cable connects to the Wi-Fi, that plug socket is the one that he helped design. He had my dad. And my dad would eventually move up to Scotland after he'd been loved by my grandpa and my daddima very much. And when my dad moved to Scotland, he met my mum. And they moved a bit, but they stayed in Scotland. That's when they had me. So I was born in Scotland with English parents, whose parents had come from India, even though my mum's parents came from England. My grandpa used to love telling me that story, sitting just as I am now telling it to you. And so for me, stories are such an important part of our heritage. They tell us who we are now, and they tell us where we've come from. I bet you your grandparents have amazing stories. Maybe they weren't from Britain originally either. You should ask them about it. And even if they are from Britain, they'll have the coolest stories too. So many things have happened in the past that is so interesting to listen to. And your grandparents or even your parents will have seen it. Grown-ups often have some cool stories. They might seem boring, but they're not really. If you ask a few questions, you'd be amazed what you can learn. And don't forget your teachers either. Or if you're at your local library, there are so many things to be learned from books, and your teachers and your library, they'll be able to help. If you ask questions, you'd be amazed by the stories you can find. Well, I hope that helps, and I hope that you've learned a little bit about heritage today. I hope you remember my grandpa's story, and I hope you go and find your own. Thank you very much for listening, and have a lovely day. Goodbye.
We are so grateful for Niall for sharing his grandpa's story. Now we want you to think about your story. What amazing stories can you bring to the world from your heritage? Check out the Bright Ideas projects that you could try yourself.